tunnel or it's a ticking bomb? I will try to answer the questions with my two colleagues. Dr. Shira Efron is a policy researcher at the RAND Corporation, a special advisor on Israel with RAND Center for Middle East Public Policy, and a professor at the RAND Graduate School. Shira is leading the new Israel program dealing with issues related to Israel, and as well Middle Eastern issues like food security, technology adoption in Middle East and Africa. The second participant is Major General Israel Ziv. Let's say that his CV is very long. I will try to be short. But he served most of his career in the paratroops brigade, from company commander till the position of the commander of the brigade, commander of an armored brigade. In the year 2001, I would like to remind you, 2001 is the second Intifada. Major General Israel Ziv commanded the Gaza division. And later on in 2003, he was the head of the operations directorate of the IDF. So we have two experts here, one coming from the military area and another from the more civilian one, and I believe that we will build a comprehensive picture about the Gaza Strip. I would like to say that 25 years ago, time is running so fast, I was the intelligence officer of the Southern Command. It was 1993 and the Oslo Agreement, and the first phase of the implementation was Gaza First. Since then, till these days, I can identify three further milestones. Starting with 1993, with very high expectations that the coming years will be used for trust building between the two sides. But it's ended with the second Intifada in 2000, followed by the disengagement in 2005, again with expectations that the conflict in Gaza is over. And in 2007, June 2007, Gaza became Hamastan, the area controlled by the Hamas till these days. I have to say that the gap in the expectations between 1993 to these days is deeper than the tunnels of the Hamas. And I would like to open the discussion asking General Ziv, what is, according to your best understanding, the current political and military situation in Gaza? Always.
Good afternoon. Things are moving, and the topics of yesterday, of the day, become the old news of yesterday. I mean, to talk today about Gaza after the Trump announcement, it's kind of sounds a little bit irrelevant, but of course it is very relevant. Well, I must start with your permission, Shaul, by explaining a little bit the understanding what is happening, what is the atmosphere, what is going on in Gaza in the last three and a half years. Actually, after I took a milestone, the last operation was the summer, July 2004. 14. And I think that if we look today on the position of the Hamas, we find much stronger Hamas. The situation of Gaza, much more problematic in terms of socio-economic situation of Gaza, of the population over there. The population is keep growing, but at the same time, the position of the Hamas, mainly militarily, is much stronger. I would even dare to say that the Hamas today, in terms of military power, doubled his power than 3.5 years ago, since the last engagement with the IDF. What's in it? In terms of their missile array, they increase dramatically the amount, the capability, the destruction power of those missiles, the storage, and the whole system of launching the missile system. It was taken mainly from Iran and Hezbollah, but we see a totally new, very advanced system. It's no more the days of the Qassam and the immature industry that they had there in Gaza at that time. And it's taking already under consideration the Israeli capabilities of the Iron Dome. So it's totally new systems. In terms of maneuverability, I think that today there is more development in the Gaza underneath than above the ground. They have developed very large tunnels of communication, logistics, and maneuverability within Gaza. Also the renewal their tunnels, the attacking tunnels, what we call, trying to reach through them to cross the fence, but mainly internally. And actually they build on their military maneuverability to do it through the tunnels, which apparently it gives them the option to maneuver big forces. It's not only, you know, few squads. They can move a battalion from a place to place underground without being seen or noticed outside. But they also raise new capabilities, again with the encouragement of Iran and the Hezbollah, like aerial capabilities. We don't talking aircraft, but other devices that can be launched and cross the border with some destruction capability, not massive, but it's there. They have much better so-called Navy capabilities. And they even are developing cyber, which we cannot underestimate. Again, it's not the capacity of superpower or any close to Israel, but it's there. So militarily, we are talking about a totally new Hamas in terms of their capacity, their capability, and their so-called military power. At the same time, I must say that unlike that, all of that armament, all of that force buildup is been done very clearly through all the contributions and backing that they are getting from outside, which over 90% of every dollar, over 90 cents of every dollar that they have gotten to recover from the last operation of the IDF was going directly to military purposes, and of course there are direct money that comes to that purpose, especially when that engaged together with the Iranian interests in the region. And their idea is, of course, to create containment around Israel. Not only around Israel, it's all over the Middle East, but in our case, we see them getting this containment strategy both in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, of course, and in Gaza Strip. So basically, I think we are in a quite of a crossroad, you might say even a boiling point, because the pressure there is huge, and I assume we are going to talk about it. At the same time, their military capacity is in a different place. Of course, it leads to the question whether they are now up to another engagement or another military clash or not. This is hard to say. Usually we believe that with that capacity build-up, it is not done to create a better political position to start negotiation with Israel. This is not the case. I would also dare to claim, with your permission, if I have another 2 minutes. You have it. There are few problems with the Hamas. It's not just how armed he is or what kind of new capability he has. Number one is that they had this theoretical conflict of being either a government or terror organization. It doesn't really go together. And they stick, they following the terror organization and try to keep this small umbrella as a legitimate government. But of course they do nothing about that, or everything about that is about trying to put the blame on others, on the Israeli siege and et cetera, et cetera. And by being also a terror organization and mainly trying to follow, they see themselves as a smaller brother of the big brother, which is the Hezbollah. It's a good example for them to follow. But they are lacking the maturity of the Hezbollah in terms of strategy. The Hamas doesn't have any strategy at all. Actually, it's a very infantile organization. They are very childish because they still keep the upper level of ideology, which is, in simple words, to wake up one morning and to see that Israel is not there. And on the other side, in a practical manner, they have only tactics. And why do I say that they are very childish? For a simple reason. When they feel that they are strong, they become like a child, trying to dare Israel, trying to tease, trying to create a position for the Hamas. They are even trying to use that in order to manipulate their tensions and power game with the PA, with the Palestinian Authority. And of course, every time that Israel is doing such an operation, they became the victim, the poor child, like crying to the world, look what is going on, what is happening, you know, I'm the victim. But in between there is no strategy, which, by the way, if you look at the Hezbollah, I don't like them, they are our enemies. But it's amazing, this organization. They have a strategy, they have a plan, they have goals, they have timetable, they do process, they have budget, they have all aspects of strategy. It's not just about the militaristic side. They have policy, they have the social and political aspect. But if you try to compare in any way the Hamas to them, there is nothing there. Only ideology and the tactics of being strong or less strong and teasing Israel. And this is why they don't get anywhere, and this is why we have a problem with them, that how can you negotiate with somebody that doesn't have any real plan? What is the ground that you start to talk with him? But I'm sure we'll get to that a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Shira, can you help us to see the other side of the coin? The humanitarian, civilian aspects of Gaza.
Sure, but if I could just respond to what was said here. First of all, I'd like to quote Yoram Cohen, former head of the Shin Bet, who said this morning, actually, that Hamas is a much weaker position, militarily, financially, and politically. He spoke very eloquently at a whole speech about that, and I can get even to today. We have a lot of divisions between the Shin Bet and the IDF as to what goes in and out of Gaza and permits. So this is an ongoing debate, and
it's natural.
Exactly, and I'm not questioning clearly the expertise, especially when we talk about operational stuff and tactical. But there are other views within the security.
I am the one that doesn't have any interest to show that the Hamas is weak.
Well, I'm not going to go into people's motivation. I'm just going to say what was said here on the record a few hours earlier, and I think it matters. But I do want to, before I go to the humanitarian stuff, I think it's important to say that it makes sense that Hamas, on some levels at least, is much weaker than it was before, because a lot of the funding, the international funding that goes into this, was not from Iran. There's a problem with Hamas being pushed into Iran's orbit again now, but most of the funding came from Qatar and Turkey, and this funding has dried out. They don't have the funding. They are a pariah organization in many countries, the Sunni countries around the world. They don't speak with Hamas, and of course, basically, they've admitted that they failed running the civilian affairs of Gaza. So if you look at just actions and not what they say, they have shown unprecedented pragmatism when working with the Egyptians on their reconciliation process with the PA. And I don't want anyone to get me wrong. There's nothing good about Hamas. It's a vicious, cynical, terrorist organization. But we should see the pragmatism it has shown in their reconciliation process, agreeing to 3,000 PA security forces to come back to Gaza. The PA has actually refused doing this, agreeing on working on preventing cross-border cooperation with terrorist organizations in the Sinai to appease Egypt. So I think we have to take these things into consideration. We've just completed a report, the RAND Corporation, that looked more closely at the humanitarian issue on Gaza. And the humanitarian issue, you know, I think mostly when we're in Israel, people say, well, we left Israel, we don't care, it's their problem, they elected Hamas, what can we do? But I think as has been shown over and over in reports, there's a Gordian knot between the humanitarian situation in Gaza and the security risks to Israel. It does not stay in Israel, either in the form of rockets or tunnels or other things. This is one thing. And the second thing that I'd like to talk about is there are also other less traditional security risks to Israel. I can put some more meat on the bones. There are about 2 million people in the Gaza Strip now. It's the 4th most densely populated area in the world. On average, each Gazan woman has 5 children. So by 2030, Gaza's population is going to be 3.1 million. 70% of the population is under the age of 30. 60% of them are youth. So 60% of these youth are unemployed. 1 million of the population, half the population is on food aid. Someone said today there's no poverty in Gaza, but my training in economics indicates that if half of your population is on food aid, 60% is unemployed, there's no cash in Gaza. There's just no cash. People default on loans, and there's no collection for the few services that are still presented there. So I think that's poverty. We also, I think, we constantly hear people talking about the crumbling infrastructure. You have to fix the infrastructure. So what does it mean? I'll talk about 2 things that I think are the most pressing, and 2 are water issues. One is the water that's unavailable for drinking and bathing and cooking and all these things we need water for, and the other one is sewage. So starting with the water, this is just the tyranny of geography. No one did anything bad, but Gaza has only one source of fresh water. It's the coastal aquifer. 97% of it is unfit for human consumption. What does it mean? That every day, because the water level is so low, every day 30 cubic meters of sewage and chemicals penetrate the aquifer. Half of Gaza's population, they receive water, and I have the number here, for 8 hours every 4 days. How do they get their water? Most of them, they just buy water from private vendors. The water is not monitored. No one knows what's in this water that they're drinking. The other problem that I think is probably more worrisome for Israel is the sewage. It's not a new problem. Since 2012, only 25% of Gaza's sewage has been collected and treated for and used for irrigation. But now, as a result of, there's no electricity in Gaza. Oh, I forgot to mention that. There's electricity in Gaza 4 to 6 hours a day. That's the average. There's no electricity for treating sewage. So guess what happens with this sewage? And it made it a little bit to the Israeli press. Every day, 108,000 cubic meters of sewage poured into the Mediterranean. And if you're like me, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around what does it mean 108,000 cubic meters. So I did the math for you. You know Olympic-sized pools? 43 of these every day of sewage goes into the Mediterranean. And because of the currents on the Mediterranean, again, it's just geography, straight up to Israel. So periodically, and this does not make it to the news, the Ashkelon desalination plant that provides Israel with 15 to 20% of its drinking water is being shut down. Maybe we care less about that, but children have died swimming in this water in Gaza in the summer. This is a real issue, and it does not stay in Gaza. Now, sewage, you can say, oh, water, it's really sad, sewage is kind of disgusting, but no, it has real public health issues. And this is what our public health experts, not regional experts, have looked and said, okay, what are the risks? The fact that you don't have enough water, and the numbers are such that I think in schools in Gaza, I have the numbers somewhere, but the schools in Gaza, you have one faucet per 71 children. You know, there are people here, like I have young children, I teach them to wash hands, especially in the flu seasons. There's not enough water to wash hands. This is associated with different diseases. Hospitals have cut down on sterilization and sanitizing equipment in Gaza. They can't, the chemicals lead to hypertension, blue baby syndrome. And I think most worrisome from Israel is the fact, remember I told you about the sewage penetrating the drinking water? This has real issues that, you know, Iron Dome would not block and underground barrier, tunnel barrier would not block. We looked at the risks for salmonella, polio, meningitis, hand and mouth and foot disease, and cholera. These are real risks that would not stay in Gaza. They would affect Israel. And even if Israel could treat it, who do you think the international community is going to hold accountable for? It's not, even if it's not Israel's fault. Who is going to be held accountable for a cholera epidemic in Gaza? And I'm going to just, it's not imaginary. Polio, thank goodness everyone's vaccinated, both in Gaza and in Israel, but polio just a couple of years ago was found in the Israeli sewage system. It came from Gaza. So these are real risks. And, you know, and if a few years ago you would tell me, what are you talking about? Cholera on Israel's borders? How can it be? But it happened in Iraq and it happened in Yemen. So we know that given the right circumstances, this can happen in today's Middle East. And what's worse is that due to, and we can talk about it later, but because of no energy, no water, hospitals have cut down on services, clinics are not functioning. We can get into UNRWA having to shut down its services as well because of lack of funding. And the lack of coordination. If there was a cholera epidemic, Hamas and Fatah don't talk to each other. Israel doesn't talk to Hamas. Egypt is. How do you coordinate an effective treatment plan? So on this happy note, you can move to the next.
In order to try to summarize the two opposite perspectives about Gaza, unfortunately we are after about a month of rather rallies organized by the Hamas along the Israeli border, and the demonstration in Gaza will culminate on the so-called Nakba Day next week. So probably it will lead to a kind of escalation. And my question to both speakers, what should Israel do in order to find the balance between, on one hand, the security of Israel, and on the other hand, the prevention of humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza? I think that this is the main challenge that Israel has to deal with in the coming days. Israel, please.
Before we talk Nakba, let's talk a little bit above the Nakba. Like the Eurovision. Just to understand the words in numbers. The budget of the annual budget of the Hamas is $500 million, $500 million. 88% of that goes to military. How much goes to the sewage problem, which is a huge problem? I agree with you. Any guess? None. Bingo. Zero. Nothing. How much go to develop infrastructure? In general, zero. To build new factories, zero, the same answer. $500 million. It's not huge, but it's not so small. And when it all goes to military, then you have the background to understand what I'm talking about. That's huge. And I agree with the professor absolutely that disengaging physically from Gaza doesn't disengage us from the problem. Okay? Leaving Gaza doesn't mean that Gaza leaves Israel. This is for sure, and I try to put this complicated, I call it, it's kind of a double catch, because it's kind of a containment of the situation. And try to understand this complication before we talk a little bit about what could be solutions, and then maybe to go to the Nakba. Politically, we do have a problem because, as I said yesterday, these guys doesn't have a political agenda. They have ideology. It's above politics, and it's a religious one. So there is no sense there, and you cannot meet any sense, try to talk their ideology vis-a-vis the Jewish ideology, whose God is right, etc. I mean, it's above common people and governments to have any solution or way. Honestly, at this time, we also know that in the other side, in the Israeli side, I'm not sure that we are well prepared to engage in any political solution of acknowledging the Hamas or some of that kind. But even if so, I doubt if there is anybody today in the Hamas that is willing to start to negotiate any serious political solution. Militarily, as I mentioned, the Hamas is always moving between this losing and the feeling of gaining a power back, trying to position them back as the brother of the Hezbollah. At the same time, we have also a problem because for Israel, there is no really decisive military solution too. This is why it's catch. Because in theory, yes, we can take the IDF, we can take over Gaza, we can clean the tunnels. First, it's going to cost. In a lot of casualties, it's not going to be simple. But we can do it. On the other hand, and then what? And we have that experience being stuck in Lebanon. Do we want to be stuck again in Gaza? And who is going to replace them? In our previous experience in Lebanon, we kicked out Amal and the PA and the PLO and that, but we got back the Hezbollah, which is much bigger and worse than what was there before. So doing the same mistake in Gaza is not really an option. So it's not just about the militarity. So Israel doesn't want a decisive victory over there, or too decisive. The economic and social aspect, you are right. There is a question of responsibility. Israel cannot ignore it. I absolutely agree. Just from the simple example of the polio or other sicknesses or disease or whatever that comes to Israel, and also to be in charge in this way or another, to be accountable for a catastrophe over there. It's very clear. On the other hand, they don't take responsibility. So we are stuck here too. And of course, there is this structural issue with the PA. Actually, Gaza is under the PA. It has to be the same government. Let's assume that tomorrow Israel and the world, we go and do agreement with the Hamas. We acknowledge the Hamas, etc., etc. Then we apart the Hamas. We have two Palestinian authorities. We are weakening the PA, the Palestinian Authority. We actually go against the existing agreements that we have with the Palestinian Authority. So this is not really also kind of a good option. So actually, strategically, we are a bit stuck in that position. And the question is, okay, where are we moving from here? Before getting that, I would like to say a few things about the Nakba. Yes, it's true that politically and strategically, the Hamas is much weaker than before. Why? First of all, because of the Egyptians. They are blocking them. They cut most of the tunnels. There were thousands of tunnels in that strip, 55 kilometers of strip. There were thousands of tunnels. We believe that today there might be, like before, very few. I would not mention the number, you understand why, but very, very few. And also, they will be shut down by the Egyptians. They fight it very seriously and very hard. Okay. The Arab world has forgotten them. They are not relevant anymore, definitely not as they used to be. All this budget that the Qatarian and everybody said that they're going to help them is lost, and you are right in that aspect. Actually, the only one that have some interest and some backing are the Iranians and the Hezbollah, which is more or less the same. The Turks, a little bit, but it's not substantial. It doesn't really help them in any real way. And the Turks themselves are not in a good position internationally. So basically, strategically and politically, they are stuck and they are much weaker than before. I agree with that as well. They had a plan. They want to use the Nakba Day and apparently the opening of the new embassy, the American embassy in Jerusalem, to rebring the Hamas problem as a Palestinian problem, and even as a regional problem, back to the attention of the world, to the table, as we say. And for that, they have started this build-up of the last 6 weeks or so. You know, every Friday they do this rehearsal and build up everything to create, you know, the attention of the people, the recruitment, the attention of the world, etc., in order to reach this Nakba Day next week. From my humble point of view, it's a lot of noise and very little will really happen. Yes, we're going to see thousands of people. They're going to appear probably in 5 or 6 areas. And some of them going to march to the fence. First of all, I want to clear or to clarify one thing. This is pure Hamas act. this is not kind of a natural resistance of the population, etc., etc. This is from A to Z, and we know it. It's organized, facilitate, finance, push, threatened event by the Hamas to achieve the goal, attention. Number two, I don't think we're going to see there so many people as they expect or try to have. We will not see there 100,000 people. I don't think so. I think much, much less. And I think that the IDF, from what I know, and I'm connected, we are prepared for that. Israel is prepared for that. The IDF is prepared for that. What does it mean prepare? It means prepare in presence, in stopping them to cross the fence. This is not an option for Israel for them to cross the fence. It's not an option. If you like, I can explain later why. And certainly to do it in a minimal casualties. You see from time to time here a video or a clip of something like somebody is shooting, you know, without any responsibility or something of that kind. This is not correct. This is not true. The truth is that we have senior officer on each one of each sniper. They know who they are shooting in most cases, if they need or there is authorization to shoot. And they do their best, of course, not to kill. But when the purpose of the people that are coming, the crowd and the Hamas people, is to create bloodshed, they create all the conditions for that to happen. And unfortunately, even those events that are happening, there are fatalities, it's something that if the IDF could, it would have prevented it.
Thank you. Shira, what is your response?
Well, I must say that with a lot of what you said, I agree, and I think not only Hamas does not allocate funds for the civilian affairs, but it also sabotages them. As a few months ago, if you recall, they dug a tunnel under Kerem Shalom, which is the only crossing into Gaza, the lifeline for good. So there's no question the level of neglect of Hamas of the civilian affairs of the population. But we can't, it will be just really boring if we agree. So first of all, the fence protests, they were initially initiated by individual activists that were not Hamas. Hamas took over forcefully. But the initiation, the empowerment, the sense of agency, it's not started with Hamas. It's not where we are now. I want to get to the solutions though, because I think what we have to understand is Gaza, it's on a borderline of catastrophe. The situation is really bad, but it's a man-made crisis. There are technical solutions that are not being implemented because of political barriers, and it's bad and good news. The bad news is because, as you can see, the political issues are very, very complicated, but the good news is that existing technologies today can very easily solve all these problems. So I want to start there with the political barriers, if you let me, and then I can speak about concrete ideas that I think can be implemented even today. First of all, there's this absurd situation, if you think about it, that the chief fundraiser today for Gaza project is the head of the Israeli government coordinator for activities and the territories. It's basically the Poli Mordechai is now leaving his role, but he goes around the world trying to fundraise for Gaza. And this is one thing. And the other absurdity, I think, is that the United States, who's been the most generous supporter to UNRWA, the UN fund that supports Palestinian refugees in Gaza and the West Bank, in other countries also, but it's mostly in Gaza, less even so in the West Bank, an organization that Israelis loathe, this government loathe. Netanyahu goes to Trump in their meeting, was it January, February? Yeah. And says, you know, I don't know what he actually says in word, but said, you can defund UNRWA if you want in Lebanon and Jordan, but don't do it in the West Bank and Gaza. So these are two absurd things that can happen, and here we have two solutions. The first one is to work on the importance of continuing funding UNRWA. UNRWA is an organization with a lot of problems. No one thinks it's a benevolent, naive organization that's not party to this conflict, that it's stored munitions before. Apparently it has employed Hamas activists. We got to give them credit. They cracked on these things, but it has its problems. But in Gaza specifically, UNRWA, as I said before, it gives food, provides food for half of the population, 1 million people. It employs 10,000 teachers, 270 schools, 260,000 students in schools. It operates 22 clinics that without them, where will they go if the hospitals are not working and they don't have power? So this is a big thing, and I think Israel has a lot of leverage here, and Israel can, if the Prime Minister said it, and it was reported in the news, I think this is something that can be turned on fast. It's not a long-term fix, but at the moment, this is just critical. Another issue is, this is again, there's a lot of international interest in investing in projects in Gaza. You're talking about Hamas not allocating funds for a wastewater treatment plant or desalination plant. You know, one wastewater treatment plant, a sewage treatment plant, is $560 million. So, I mean, they can't. It's not about Hamas to fund this. It's not about the PA to fund this. It's all international donors. And international donors, you have all these conferences, but there's no follow-through. You come to donors, Poli Mordechai goes to donors and say, please, you need to save Gaza. And they're saying, well, you know what? If it's such an Israeli interest, if you care about it so much, if you're going to suffer the consequences, and frankly, you're going to have probably another round of fighting that a lot of these things are going to be destroyed, how about you put some money into this? And politically, it's not a feasible proposition now in Israel, but maybe it's part of a bigger package deal. If we're talking about the bodies, you have an Israeli civilian that is in Gaza now. These are creative ideas that we can think about. I think more on the technical, for the economy, the Shin Bet has vetted 5,000 Palestinians in Gaza and said that those can work in Israel. It's 5,000 people, it's not a lot, but you know, these are big families that can make a difference and create motivations. The Shin Bet vetted them, but they're not letting them now come out. The zero tolerance policy, I understand it, you know, but there are other risks, including with the demonstrations by the fence. Solar panels, it's something that we know today that maybe not for a large hospital, but for a clinic, one solar panel, not a large one, would be sufficient to operate it. These have to go in fast. Israel maintains it has alleviated some restrictions, but there are a lot of materials on Israel's list of what goes in and out. And again, this is where the divisions between the Shin Bet and the IDF go in. The IDF says, well, you know, we can manage some risks. Shin Bet has a zero tolerance risk, and so at least as of September 2017, and maybe it changed a little bit, 70% of the materials you needed to fix the water and sewage infrastructure were on the list that Israel maintains of materials that cannot go in. This is a real issue. And I have a few other solutions, but I think one of the important things is that Abu Mazen is Israel's peace partner, and it's important not to undermine him and the Palestinian Authority negotiating with the terrorist organization. However, he's an obstacle to the reconstruction of Gaza. And they need to find technical ways of working through the UN and through private sector and through other partners, and not let Abu Mazen dictate from Ramallah if Gaza would be reconstructed or not.
We need time to solve the problems of Gaza, and unfortunately, our time here is over. So the solution for Gaza will left for future discussions. So thank you, General Ziv. Thank you, Shira, and we are looking for a better future with our neighbors in Gaza. Thank you.